This is the story of the emergency response and long-term recovery of Marshall County, Indiana in 2018 to a devastating 500-year flood event. Marshall County became an epicenter for the work of hundreds of volunteers and thousands of volunteer hours over the next 13 months, with both local assistance and volunteers from across the U.S.
I really think Marshall County has a great opportunity to tell the story, and there's a great story to tell in terms of how to do it. No rural community is the same, but there are going to be best practices and keys to success that I think the Marshall County flood relief story can tell others.
This is a story of community resilience, strategic organization, and compassion in action in the face of overwhelming loss for a rural county home to some 46,000 people.
I never thought in that realm that it could happen and happen that quickly. My first sense was I don't really understand the magnitude of this flooding, especially on Fur Road and in that German Township area. We had multiple roads that were closed and many with high water.
During the Marshall County flood, our home took in 8 feet of water. The flood had a way of showing us that people come together, in disasters like this.
Volunteers came out in droves to help sandbag to protect homes and businesses. School principals filled sandbags side by side next to their students. City council members helped lay sandbags around homes and businesses to try to prevent damage due to the water. Complete strangers showed up to volunteer with shovels, food, and a helping hand. A strong sense of unity and volunteer spirit began to swell.
I saw pictures of fields in Bremen Monday evening. And I thought, we may have an issue here. I never want to go through again. We'll be prepared if we have to, but it's just so frustrating to watch people lose their homes. I got interviewed by one of the news channels down here in River Park Square, and the water was swift. It was scary. I mean, definitely the worst part was on the far south side. South Plum Street and South Walnut Street by far was the worst.
The Yellow River crested at an all-time historic level of 17.61 feet on the evening of Friday, February 22, 2018, after days of intense rain on frozen ground. Leaders from across Marshall County came together, quickly realizing the scope of the unfolding disaster, organizing efforts and working to aid impacted individuals and businesses. First and foremost, getting families whose homes were no longer habitable to emergency shelters. The scope of the event soon became known. 250 homes across Marshall County were impacted by the flood. Of the 78 homes hit hardest by the disaster, 40 were in Plymouth and the rest spread throughout Marshall County in Bremen, Argus, Tippecanoe, and elsewhere. In the meantime, community leaders worked around the clock for days to lay out plans for the first stage of recovery, the cleanup process. Plans took shape quickly for a coordinated effort with county and city officials engaging with local citizens who stepped up to share past experiences and connections.
So United Way has a 211 information and referral service. So we activated that very quickly after the flood to help gather information from flood victims about the damage that had occurred and what kinds of assistance they might need. The flood event itself, it was clearly visible at the initial stages that we had a major problem. And as the assessments came in, we saw 250 homes were impacted and so on. But as those waters begin to recede, it's really amazing how quickly people forget that there was an issue, that there was a major event that impacted our communities. A lot of the activities that we did with fundraising were twofold, to again make sure people knew that there were still families that needed help and to provide those dollars that were needed to buy materials and help them get back in their homes and stable again. We work with a number of nonprofit organizations, and that puts us at a distinct advantage in a situation like this. And we are able to quickly make those connections and have those conversations and get those folks around the table to talk about how we're going to work better together to address this kind of event.
On day 3, February 26, United Way called an emergency meeting of the Community Table, a county-wide network of nonprofits, government entities, and faith-based organizations. A special invitation to an organization with deep connections across the country brought valuable experiences and resources to aid in recovery efforts. INVOAD, Indiana Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, is a coalition of over 50 of the most reputable national organizations and hundreds of organizations within Indiana, too. The Indiana VOAD adheres to the same principles established by the National VOAD: cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration to help communities prepare for and recover from disasters.
Every incident is a local incident. It begins at the local level and ends at the local level. I encourage the local government entities to come together to work on the collaboration and the coordination piece of these emergencies and disasters. We were very fortunate that we had good people step up and help our flood survivors in this incident.
9 days after the flood levels hit their high mark, volunteers packed the Plymouth Fire Department for a kickoff rally for a community volunteer day. Volunteers mucked out basements, ripped up floors, and removed drywall contaminated by floodwater. Churches and businesses provided free food and childcare to volunteers. School buses were used to transport volunteers from hard-hit areas to workplaces.
Volunteers just love to help, and it's cool being around a group of people that just want to give in whatever way they can. And there's such an energy there where people get excited that whether it's filling sandbags or putting a lunch together or cleaning dorm rooms at Ancilla for all of these volunteers to stay. We had a blast cleaning the dorm rooms. Calling churches, that was one of the things that really stands out to my mind of the conversations of whether it was a secretary or a pastor or whoever from the church that I happened to be speaking with, that maybe they were affected, maybe they weren't, but they knew someone in their church. So they had their own story of personally understanding the effects of the flood and what it meant. And I just love volunteers. I love that people are willing to help other people for no benefit to themselves.
By now, the steering committee for the Marshall County long-term recovery operations was in place. United Way provided leadership and served as a fiscal agent. As the muckouts and debris removal continued, a first-rate team of recently retired Marshall County volunteers was recruited to lead construction, case management, housing, and hospitality committees. Weekly long-term recovery meetings were held. INVOAD disaster relief organizations, including American Red Cross, Catholic Charities, Heavy Equipment Response Coalition, Mennonite Disaster Service, Purdue Extension, Salvation Army, Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, AmeriCorps Teams, United Methodist Committee on Relief, and the National Relief Network. Volunteers, local and from across the country, quickly got to work, house by house, city by city, building relationships while cleaning out and rebuilding homes. 17 volunteers attended a 2-day training to become case managers.
As I told all case managers that it's running a marathon, it's not going to happen overnight, and to keep consistent of what we're doing and wait till the finish line before we're done.
The special thing about Marshall County is, I believe, they're relational minded. They like community. They love community, as a matter of fact. The willingness here in Marshall County has been open door, open policy. I want to help. How can I help? And they just do it, you know.
113 families entered into case management for help to apply for assistance. This all took place as good news was on its way. Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb quickly implemented a disaster emergency for 9 counties in response to widespread flooding and infrastructure damage. By March 16, executive orders expanded to a total 35 Indiana counties. The stage was set for a request for assistance from the federal government. The president approved a disaster declaration on May 5th that made federal funds available for individual assistance in Marshall County. Altogether, total financial assistance for Marshall County individuals from FEMA, Small Business Administration low-interest loans, local contributions to the Flood Relief Fund, and from disaster relief organizations totaled nearly $1 million. In addition, the Marshall County Long-Term Recovery Operations recorded over 800 volunteers, contributing 21,700 hours over the course of 13 months.
As construction manager would be everything to do with the physical rebuild of the flood homes. And that was everything from buying materials, getting them there on time, coordinating volunteers, oversee the budget, and then be responsible for completing all work on that house. We did have a couple of particular groups came in. We had one group come in that was National Relief Network. They brought 100 to 200 kids. They gave you many hands. And we did a lot of those things that took a lot of labor without being highly skilled. And it was just fun to see them get into it.
As the months progressed, more and more cases were fielded by the case management team. Volunteers replaced drywall. Mold remediation kept homes from causing health issues years far into the future. Basements that had been flooded were cleaned out and safe again to use. Destroyed furnaces and water heaters were replaced. The long-term recovery team worked tirelessly to coordinate and organize the complex and time-consuming work.
Pretty much providing meals for volunteers, housing. I worked with Jack Davis, essentially. He pretty much did most of the setting up of the housing and places for the volunteers to stay. And then I was set up to the meals and the whole thing. It amazed me because I guess in all my years I'd never seen a community come together like that.
This situation was, we had two families that lived with us pretty much the entire time the recovery was going on. We housed groups that came to work on that, several different groups, but nonstop through the whole thing. We housed them and provided a place for them to stay and meals to eat. It was good to feel the response that the people were making to help our community that weren't from our community. It was good to get that feeling because in a day and age where things don't feel good all the time, that felt good.
There's a lot of moving parts. Fortunately, there were a lot of volunteers to help, but I think some families it's going to take or has taken close to a year, if not more. We really worked with others to make sure that the resources and the funds that were donated by so many within the county as well as around the country were optimized and used in the best way possible to make sure that people could get back on their feet, move back into their homes, and start their lives again.
You know, I knew that there was still a need in the town. I could see it myself. I knew people personally that were still displaced from their homes. So, you know, when I saw that the need was there, I wanted to meet it. And it was a position that I took on. And I basically just helped facilitate the administrative aspect of volunteer coordination, moving forward from there. For the purposes of closing a case specifically, what we're searching to do is essentially help families rebound from the losses that they suffered as a result of this significant trauma that happened in their lives, physically and emotionally. Before we walk away from these families, they're as whole as they can be, and we didn't leave anybody behind.
The greatest heroes of the 2018 Marshall County flood, those volunteers and flood survivors who kept focused on a vision of recovery after the flood. The volunteers who kept on coming back from the very beginning of the disaster to a year afterwards, never stopping or satisfied until each and every individual was safely back into their homes. Safe and sound, stronger than ever, living united.
It went from being hopeless to being very hopeful.
This is Marshall County. These are the voices representing the hundreds of people affected by the floods and the hundreds of people and organizations near and far that stepped up to help. We are forever grateful.
Thank you for everyone who helped my family.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of the volunteers.
Thank you.
We may be little, but we're mighty.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful.
Thank you to everyone that helped in any way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marshall County.